Freedom Fighter Radio coming to you live from the heart of the Great White North, the heart of the true North, strong and free. Hello, hello, everybody. Happy Thursday afternoon. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. This is Freedom Fighter Radio. How's everybody doing? Give me a second here as I check all of our channels if we are live on all the channels. I tried to do this properly before we get started, so I am really crossing my fingers and hoping that yes, indeed, we are live on Odyssey. I can see that we are. And are we live on BitChute? Hopefully we are. All right, I'll just check that when we get there. But I think we are live all across Facebook on Crosspost. I don't see it, but hopefully it is. Oh shoot, maybe not. I don't know what happened there. I thought we are, but anyways, folks, well, it's never been a better time to be a freedomizer, a freedom podcaster, and a member of the freedom community. So I can see that we are cross-post on all the platforms except on Facebook again today. Just when Mr. Zuckerberg promised that the Facebook will be just like X, he said, but that's only, all of that's just gaslighting. I am not trusting that. See, I don't see the live video on Facebook anywhere. I don't see it anywhere. All right, folks. Anyways, do you guys think this is the end of Canadian freedom or Canadian wealth? You know, we are about 3 days away from Trump's inauguration and possibly 3 days away from a steep tariff against Canada's export goods to the United States. Is this the end to Canadian economic wealth? Will this create a big recession in Canada? Or is it possible that this American tariff could actually be, although detrimental to the oil oligarchs, is it possible that it could be beneficial to the ordinary Jane and Joe Canadians? Is that possible at all? Could it be possible that our domestic oil consumption would have a downward pressure in price, if not synthetically manipulated by the oligarchs, because of the American rejection of our oil due to the tariff? It'll be more expensive for them. Will that affect a flooding of supply in our domestic market? Imagine a less than $1 Canadian per liter of gas at the pumps. Should we vehemently reject these tariffs or should we embrace it, as it can potentially increase the supply above local demands for goods in Canada, therefore decrease inflation in Canada? I think we should probably think about possibly embracing this tariff. Well, then stick around. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. This is Freedom Fighter Radio. Let's talk about this tariff and how it's going to be detrimental or beneficial to the ordinary Jane and Joe Canadians. Let's get this show started right now.
Freedom Fighter Radio, what is up? Whoa! Shout out to Freedom Fighter Radio. And Joe, you're doing great work, brother, and I love it. All right, always.
I am Derek Sloan, the leader of the Ontario Party. You are listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio Canada podcast, only here on the Ordinary Joe Show.
Make sure you listen to the Freedom Fighter Radio on the Ordinary Show.
I'm Pastor Arthur from Calgary. You are listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio Worldwide podcast, only here on the Ordinary Joe Show.
I'm on Freedom Fighter Radio on the Ordinary Joe Show. That's quite a mouthful.
Yes.
Hey guys, this is Chris Sky. Listen to Freedom Fighter Radio. They're here today, back in the blue, and so am I.
Hi, Ordinary
Mr.
Joe.
Poliev, how are you doing, sir?
Good. How are you, Ordinary Joe?
Freedom Fighter Radio on a Thursday night. It's never been a better time to be gathering together like this as Freedomizers all across the board, all across Canada, all across the United States. We have a lot of brothers and sisters in the fight and in the faith in the United States that are listening into the Freedom Fighter Radio. And we're starting to get the hang of this Rumble Studio, this free platform, folks. Please expect that we will still, from time to time, have some technical issues. But, I'm starting to get a hang of it. Just be patient with me, folks. And we'll always have a glitch. Just like today, we are not on Facebook again. For some reason, we are not on Facebook, but we are successfully on Rumble, on Locals, BitChute, and Odyssey. And we'll just repost it. You guys know the reason we are still on Facebook is because most of our listeners are still sticking around on Facebook, and we have a combined about 125,000 followers on different platforms on Facebook. Five of those big pages was kind of hijacked by fascist book. One day I woke up and my admin access to all those pages were just all of a sudden gone. But because of Rumble Studio, we are able to push some live broadcasts over those five pages, a combined 70,000 followers on five pages on Facebook. We can still push live broadcasts to those when we are successfully, mounting our live cast on Facebook. But when we're not successful like this, what's the benefit of it? That's why I would like to invite everybody to please join us on Locals, Rumble, Odyssey, and BitChute. We also have a couple of small YouTube channels. These are all backup, folks. So because in the future we are expecting that they're just going to silence us. So we're talking about this tariff because a lot of the oligarchy, the elite, the political class, and the wealthy class in Canada are all getting nervous about this tariff that is imminently. It is imminent among many analysts and insiders. They are saying that this tariff, the tariff threat of Donald Trump, is imminent. It's coming on Monday. Inauguration day is on Monday, folks. It's things came by so fast. We are already January 20th. It felt like New Year's Eve was just a few days ago, but it's already January 20th on Monday. So if you ask the ordinary Jane and Joe Canadians who have been impoverished by the policies of Trudeau this past 9 years, everybody that I talk to, fellow ordinary Joes, blue collar, cleaners, security guards, construction workers, crossing guards, janitors, ordinary Jane and Joe Canadians across this country, they are open to the discussion of all that's happening and the trolling of Trump. For some people are taking it seriously. The political class is taking it seriously in the sense of they're taking it as a serious threat. There was a meme that I just posted. Let me I think it's on my Canadian profile. Here. There's no screen share, but I'm gonna read to you the meme, a cartoon meme that I posted for many of you who also follows me on Facebook, on my personal profile on Facebook, the Canadian one, Joe OJ Ordinario. This is a cartoon with a big hand hovering on top of five people, and Every person has a rope tied to his and her neck, and the rope is tied to one of the finger of this overhanging gigantic hand, right? So it looks like they're marionettes tied to their the rope tied to their necks, tied up to the finger of this gigantic hand overhanging on top of them. And the caption says, "When I criticize the system, they think I criticized them." And that is, of course, because they fully accept the system and identify themselves with it. It was a quote from a certain Thomas Merton. And that particular cartoon was specifically very popular in x.com, right? Because whenever you criticize the system, similar to COVID, right? Criticize the vaccination, they say, you know what? Um, you are you are attacking the people who just wants to be free, right? When you attack the system, you attack big pharma, you attack the tyrannical heavy hand of the government. They will try and spin it as if you're attacking the people who wants to exercise their freedom, the people who wants to get the vaccine. They will turn it around and tell you that you are attacking them. If you're attacking the medical industrial complex, they will say, you are attacking the nurses. Are we coming across okay there, folks? Since we are too early on Eastern Standard Time, and there are a lot of our listeners are still in the office, let me do a quick check here on the laptop just to make sure that the be patient with me, folks. I want to make sure that our audio is coming across good there, but it's quite a reach from where I'm sitting to uh, to type on the laptop here. I can actually do it on here too, but I just want to. Uh, okay, let me go to Rumble and see if our live broadcast is loud and clear out there. Okay. All right. So it shows that our Rumble audio is good. Let's check Odyssey. Okay. Odyssey's. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I verified that our audio is at least going through. Great. Um, when you criticize the system and this particular point, as a freedomizer, as a freedom podcaster, and a member of the freedom community, as talking to my fellow ordinary Jane and Joe Canadians and Americans who are watching this as it unfolds, you know, when we criticize the powers that be and this particular tariff that is about imminently is going to come down on Monday. As soon as I'm not sure if Donald Trump, there's going to be a lot of pageantry for the inauguration. After the inauguration, they will have a little march there on the what do you call that, the mall. And as soon as that inauguration is over, the kind of person that we know Trump is, would he be going straight to the White House and go to the Oval Office and get to work right away? It seems to me that will be the case on Monday, right after all the pageantry and the ceremony. By the way, we got to keep that in prayer. The ceremony on Monday, because there's a lot of threat. The threat to assassinate President Donald Trump is still lingering around. There are still many forces who wants to take him out, both from foreign forces, but also from within, the enemy from within, who wants to take him out and blame it on the Russians or the Iranians or the Chinese. But there are forces within who wants to take him out. But I'm thinking that right after the inauguration, he will have that little march, wave at the people who will be cheering him on, and his caravan, his convoy, will go straight to the White House, and he will start signing all of these presidential decrees. And one of those decrees, I suspect, will be the 25% tariff to both Mexico and Canada, which, from the Canadian perspective, we do not want to. Um, we do not want to support that, but it's not for us Canadians to determine if we support it or not, because that's an American internal policy. We have nothing. We cannot participate in that. We can only appeal to our leaders if we think that is detrimental to Canada. We can only appeal to our leaders so that our leaders can appeal to the White House and the Trump team and the Trump government to please not do it, right? So, of course, we stand with our fellow Canadians if that indeed is going to be harmful to the Canadian economy. But I have a little slightly different opinion because I remember my back and forth, sometimes in intense, sometimes friendly exchange that I had with Mr. Polyev. Um, I'm just monitoring my output here on Odyssey, and for some reason, it went to a commercial on Odyssey. My commercial, supposedly, I don't know why, but okay. If it is going to be detrimental, we have to unite against it. But let's put everything into context. There's nothing that we can do about that. A tariff policy is an internal policy of the country who's accepting, who's receiving the export that we are sending out. They are importing Canadian goods, and it is their prerogative. It's well within the American president's um, prerogative, within the rights, and it's within the rights of the American people if the Americans wants to protect their own local industry and put tariffs on imports. You know, I really think that tariffs is a better tariffs, not only for the Americans but also for Canadians. For us in Canada, I think we should be relying on tariff to fund our social services, our government, and lay down the heavy-handed taxation. In Canada, our taxes, personal income tax, goes all the way up to 49% if you are in that certain income tax bracket. That is heavy-handed government, in my opinion. That is big government, heavy-handed governing. Taxation is always a penalty against progress, against hard work, against diligence. It's like a disincentive. It's like telling the people, we don't want you to go work because if you work, we'll tax you, right? So taxes, especially personal income tax, which started in the United States. Prior to 1913, personal income tax was unconstitutional, and I think the Americans can actually still challenge that even now because I believe the creation of the Federal Reserve. By the way, I'm brushing up on a recommended book for any freedomizers, both in Canada and the United States. G. Edward Griffin's book, the creature from Jekyll Island, the story of how the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, Christmas Eve 1913, when all of the members of Congress, both the upper house and the lower house, assemblymen, congressmen, and members of the Senate were all dismissed to go home for Christmas already. And a few um, Senate member of the Senate and Congress were lingering around to rush in legislation while everybody is home, rush in legislation to create the Federal Reserve And because it was the New World Order who installed Woodrow Wilson to be the president, the only way at that time that the Federal Reserve creation could be stopped is through a presidential veto. But the president was in on the hoax, the scam. The creation of the Federal Reserve has paved way to the creation of personal income tax. And we can see all the move that President Trump is doing now to get rid of tax on tips, tax on senior benefits, right? What else is the other one? Tax on uh, no tax on tips, no tax on seniors benefits, and there's a third one I can't remember right now. But personal taxation of personal income tax for many centuries was considered to be unconstitutional because the principle behind it, the reasoning behind it, is the biggest of burden in the first industrial revolution, when not everybody could afford a steam engine or have a locomotive. A vast majority of farmers were still using beasts of burden, cattle and horses and cows and buffaloes to work the field. And the principle was you don't tax the buffalo for the work that the buffalo has done to help feed humans. Why would the Americans tax human labor, like they call the human, because laborers, right? Um, Prior to the first industrial revolution, vast majority of society are working for themselves. In a way, entrepreneurs, self-employed, because everybody has to work the field, has to work the farms to feed themselves. A vast majority of the people are working for themselves and not working for a certain employer. But the industrial revolutions brought in the trend that the vast majority of now 99% of the members of society are employed in some form, one form or another. So the employee lifestyle is the majority. Up to 99% of the members of our society are employees, and less than 1% are employers, right? Or self-employed. Less than 1% of society are self-employed. So everybody in society is paying the personal income tax. The personal income tax was created in the United States, or been legalized in a way, I believe it's only through a presidential decree that could be challenged as unconstitutional. It's because the Federal Reserve, which is nothing about it is federal, and it doesn't have any gold reserve to back it up. It's fiat money printed out of thin air. The Federal Reserve, the creation of the Federal Reserve also simultaneously allowed the creation of the personal income tax. Remember the Boston Tea Party? The Americans were freedom fighters in the spirit by heart. That the revolution of the Boston Tea Party created the revolt against the 1% tax on tea. And it's only 1%. But I don't know the income tax schedule in the United States, but here in Canada, the highest tax bracket can pay up to, in other provinces, what I heard, in Ontario, it's up to 49% or 46%. But in other provinces, I believe that there are certain provinces that you hit the highest tax bracket, you'll be paying upwards of over 50%. So, meaning more than half of the time you're working to make money for the government and less for your own family. 40% of the time for your working for the benefit of your family, but 60% of the time you're working to fund the government. How does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. So a personal income tax is an inhuman, unconstitutional, and I believe it's an assault to human rights. I believe it's a violation of human rights that our governments are charging us personal income tax. But this is not an endorsement to evade on your taxes, because it is still the law. Maybe not the law, maybe it's a regulation. I'm not very, I used to be a tax planner, but within the law. My tax planning strategy was taught to me by my mentor, which is within the paradigm of the law. So I am not familiar. I know thus far that the tax laws, the the uh, the tax act can be challenged, and it could be successful if there's a critical mass of ordinary Jane and Joe Canadians who come together and protest against taxation, the the taxation acts, the tax act. I think some of those could be reversed, but we need a critical mass to make that happen. But while the status quo is still that, um, the status quo is that, people who are working for somebody, if you are taking in an employee's income, the status quo right now is that you pay taxes, and so we continue with that until there's a reformation or possibly revolution if people wake up. Similar to what's happening here in Toronto, that the city of Toronto has now decreased the city street speed limit from 60. Vast majority was 50 or 60, and all of a sudden one day you woke up, everybody was getting a ticket, because all of a sudden the city just decided to decrease the speed limit of for motor vehicles to 40 kilometers an hour. A lot of bicycles are faster than 40 kilometers an hour. You can see them, like joggers and runners and cyclists are going way past the cars, because it's, in my opinion, that's another way of tyrannical control, making people feel like, hey, we're controlling you. You are minions. You are subject to government control. It's sort of like rubbing it to our noses that, hey, you are citizens, you are minions, you are commoners, you have to follow the law. It's a heavy-handed municipal government edict to be reducing the speed limit to 40 kilometers an hour. I am opposed to it. I find it disgusting. I find it to be a tool for the current government to cash grab people's money. However, because it is the law, actually, quote unquote law, I'm not sure if it's law or if it's regulation that can be reversed. But right now, it is the policy of the city. It is the current policy. As much as I and you disagree with it, until it's legally reversed, constitutionally or legally, or reversed in the proper way, in the legal way, we don't have a choice. We have to follow that. As much as I disagree with it, I drive a 40 kilometers an hour. The vast majority of drivers hates me for following that speed limit. I get honks almost every day. I get honks, and people flipping the finger at me for driving within the speed limit, even in the highways. Whenever I drive 100 kilometers an hour, and when you are exiting and going on a ramp, and the ramp says reduce your speed to about 60, sometimes 50, to exit or to enter a certain or transition to a different highway, and you must slow down. People are getting angry with me for following the law, right? But as true freedomizers, we have to follow the law the way it is, even if we disagree with it. But we cannot just let the status quo keep going. If the status quo of the law is anti-human, or it doesn't make sense, then we have to speak up and rise up against it. but the brainwashing is really, people are brainwashed. People, for example, in taxation, people are brainwashed in believing that to not question the government, to comply to heavy taxation, is somewhat, somehow, and this is a mental illness, folks. This is a mental illness, but people believe this. I can't. It's baffling and it's astonishing how people could believe that by not challenging or questioning the law, somehow people feel that they're patriotic. When you do not question regulations, mandates, um, bylaws, or even the law itself, if there's a law that is nonsensical or anti Canadian, anti human, anti family, anti common sense, if there's a law or regulation or a precept or a mandate that is against common sense, anti common sense, we have to protest. Yes, we have to follow the law, but while we are following the law and we know that the law doesn't make sense, or if the law was placed by lawmakers for the purpose of tyrannical boots on our heads, on our face, just to assert their power over us, just to overlord, we follow the law until we can legally reverse that law or repeal that law. But we have to protest. We have to raise our voice. We have to s- voice it out. We have to express our thoughts and our opinions. Edward Snowden, one of my favorite Edward Snowden quote was, he said that a lot of people think that they don't need privacy because they got nothing to hide. And Edward Snowden said that those people who say that privacy is not required because they got nothing to hide are the same people who says free speech is not important because they got nothing to say. That's the same kind of mindset. We, to to actually have free speech in our society, we have to exercise that right. If you don't exercise that right of free speech, of free protest, you know, it's basic human rights. It's our basic human rights to protest, to dissent, to push back, to reject, to rebel. Rebellion is a basic human right against heavy handed authority. We like government, we like order in our society, but government is comprised of people. And a lot of people who are narcissistic or psychopaths, this is a route that they want to take. You know, places of positions in government. A lot of people who wants to be cops simply because they want the power. Do they? Do they really? And this is a problem again in our society. People who are sincere in their hearts to want to help build our society, the your good uncles and your good dads and elder brothers who have a real sense of duty and social responsibility, those who have good sound reasoning and pure heart, who wants to build society, who wants to keep our neighborhoods safe, who actually makes it, those who have common sense, those who have real love for neighbor neighbors, neighborhoods, safety, peace, order, those who have sincere love for order and law, the rule of law. They're not interested to be law enforcers. They're not interested to. I used to be interested to be a police officer. Well, not an officer, but a volunteer. I don't have the time and the energy now. I'm a little too old to volunteer in the police force. But the people who have good hearts seems to be not interested to go take those kind of jobs that helps put order in our society. It's usually those problem child in school. If you go back and remember your high school, there are people who are the bullies and you know the young people who likes to break the law and likes to break their own family values. Those who likes to swear at friends and bully and smoke and drink under legal age. They are the ones who end up aspiring for becoming police officers in our society. And so that's why there's a lot of police abuse in our society, because the good people do not want those jobs. I don't know why. I don't know why. If you are a good person, raised up in good family, let me implore you, please, to we need good police officers. Well, because freedomizers who have respect for the law and for the uniform. But the problem is, a lot of the problem child, they are the ones who's taking the uniforms. Anyways, I'm digressing too far from what we need to talk about. Is to talk about the tariffs, right? Because the powers that be, the oligarchs. I was just talking about TVO, um, television show that has been rolling for many years, as long as I can remember, ever since I migrated to Toronto in the late 90s. In mid 90s, I migrated to Toronto from Mississauga. In the mid 90s, I have been watching. I believe I started watching in the mid 90s, if not early 2000s. Steve Bacon's The Agenda. It's like a staple. It has been for many years. Steve Bacon's The Agenda on TVO here in Ontario has been playing every week for as many years as I can remember. More than a decade, more than 2 decades probably. And I bump into Steve Bacon here. He lives in the Midtown. I bump into him a few times on the road and in the local library. His kids are about the same age as my child, and he wants to take on this topic about Donald Trump trolling to make Canada the 51st state. So he brought in some guests to have a discussion, a roundtable, a panel. But every single guest that he brought into the discussion about this topic, every single one of them are like upper middle and woke left leaning progressives. How could you have a discussion when you do not allow the voice of blue collars or the ordinary Joes, the ordinary Janes, or freedomizers, or the taxpayers, the blue collars, the minimum wage. Every single one of the three. So he had former Premier Kathleen Wynne in there, and there's a left woke progressive journalist from the U.S. who's Canadian, but is resident of the U.S. And there's another one who was a former columnist at the Globe and Mail, who's also an oligarch, an elitist. All three guests that he had on were all coming from a political class, the elite class, the upper middle class member of society, and they're the ones who's threatened when the status quo of Canada and the Canadian leaders who have betrayed all of us, ordinary Jane and Joe Canadians. They want to keep the status quo the way it is. The Canada being so, how can I put it, underperforming based on its potential, based on the kind of wealth that the Lord, our Creator, has blessed us with in Canada. Our leaders have really let us down because they're only interested to line up their own personal interest, but not the interest of the ordinary Joe Americans and Canadians. So If we think about the oil industry in this country, our political leaders should have, for the longest time, should have sought out other customers for our oil more than just the Americans. Okay? Because I explained this why the Americans from 1968. I will tell this story again because not everybody likes to listen just to audio podcasts. A lot of people prefer, and I can see the insights whenever I do a video podcast. There seems to be more listeners and viewers on video podcast than just straight up audio. Um, but sometimes I don't feel I'm presentable to the camera. That's why I just do an audio podcast. But let me say this story again. There is a tactical reason why the Americans were importing oil, even though geographically, geological, from a geological factor, the Americans and the American territory has not only enough oil for their own domestic consumption, but they have enough oil if they want to tap into their own oil reserves. The Americans have enough oil to supply the entire planet for the next 100 years. The Americans have enough oil for their own oil consumption, for their domestic consumption. They have enough oil as a war chest if they go to war. And there's enough oil even to export, to supply oil to the rest of the world. And so why are they not tapping into their own oil? If you read Jeremy Corsi's, I'm always butchering his first name, Jerome Jerome Corsi's book, The Big Oil Conspiracy. If you read his book, how the conspiracy of the fossil fuel, synthetic oil, eh, there's a mention of there why the Americans wants to, because you could lose a war. One of the reasons the Germans lost the Second World War, one of the, there are many reasons, but one of the contributing factor that the Axis forces lost the Second World War was they ran out of oil. They run out of oil to fuel their tanks, their planes, their war machine. Literal oil. I'm talking about crude oil. There's no such thing as fossil fuels, folks. Read Jerome Corsi's book, the word fossil fuel, and I'm astonished that even freedomizers are still using the phrase fossil fuel. Is a fabricated phrase, like the phrase conspiracy theory. That was a fabricated phrase that was created by the CIA to vilify those who reject the narrative of the Warren Commission regarding the assassination of JFK. The Warren Commission, I believe the commissioner was a former CIA who is under suspicion to have assassinated JFK. So that phrase, conspiracy theory, is a fabricated, created phrase to dump dump water into the fire of people who are connecting the dots. So that phrase is similar to the phrase fossil fuel. Fossil fuel does not exist. The crude oil that we mine from the earth is a renewable energy. Just read Jerome Corsi's. I don't have time to get into the detail of that. But the point is, the Americans do not tap into their own oil reserve for the very purpose of number one, Second World War. The lesson learned from the Second World War is the Axis forces lost the war partly because they ran out of physical oil to gas up, to fuel up their war machine. That's one of the reasons that the Axis forces lost the war. The second reason is since 1968, and I told this story, but I'm going to tell it again. 1968, Henry Kissinger was not yet part of the um, what do you call that? Uh, the it's in the tip of my tongue again. Anyways, he was the head of national security, and being the head of national security, Henry Kissinger also were staffed with a group of intelligent individuals. I'm thinking much of them are fresh university grads, which is his own kind of think tank to brainstorm policies. So Henry Kissinger is a real genius, albeit an evil genius. He is, literally a genius. He understands foreign policies. So, in the name of national security, again, folks, I talk about raison d'être. A French, the French phrase raison d'être means the reason of the state, where it is the root phrase where the the phrase for the benefit of national security, for national interest, that came from that phrase raison d'etat, or the reason, for the reason, because of the state. That's the reason we're doing this and doing that. It's like everything is justified because of national security, right? So you almost can get away with murder by raison d'etat, for the reason of the state, for this, for the security, the national security. You can almost do any kind of crime. um and that's another episode that we had, I think about 2 years ago. I talk about that raison d'etat. And Henry Kissinger in 1968, for the very first time, he noticed that the American hegemony was threatened by the very first instance of a trade deficit. The United States since 1930s have enjoyed a trade surplus for all of those decades, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the vast majority of the 60s until 1968. Out of the blue, for the very first time, the American hegemony experienced the very first trade deficit. And so Henry Kissinger was the head of national security in 1968, and he was alarmed about what he saw, and he gathered his think tank right away. The urgency was because Henry Kissinger is a student of history, and he knew that all the empires across the history of man, every empire that experienced a trade deficit with their trading partners worldwide, once there's a trade deficit, it becomes the beginning of the fading away of that empire. That empire starts fading away. You couldn't stay as an empire any longer. I mean, uh, not long from that point. It will not be long from that point when the deficit is experienced. Not long from that point forward will that empire will start fading away. So Henry Kissinger wants to keep the American empire to be as strong as possible. So he gathered his think tank. He said, I need a solution. How do we reverse this trade deficit? Right. So he gathered his think tank, and he gave them um, the entire morning to brainstorm. And I need you to submit half a page of a clean sheet of paper, half a page of your proposal. So at the end of the session, he got all of from his think tank. He collected all the papers. Everybody submitted half a page proposal, and What he saw was everybody was just proposing Germanic and canned cookie cutter kind of solutions that they're proposing. Everything that they learn from college, everything that they learn from Keynesian economics, everybody saying the same thing, which is not, nothing different from the typical. But there's one particular brainstormer who have submitted a very radical proposal. I'll tell you in just a minute what that proposal is. But this radical proposal was the one that Henry Kissinger adopted from this think tank, and it became the policy of the United States from 1968 onwards. And what is this policy proposal? The policy proposal by this one man suggested to Henry Kissinger, we do not need to put all of our energy and efforts in reversing the trade deficit. What we need to do, according to this very radical proposal, he was saying that we need to double down, triple down on the deficit. Folks, I didn't notice the time. It's 3:51. My daughter's still not home. I'm just gonna text her to use her key when she arrives because we're live right now. But she should be home by now. So let me see the text. This is totally live, folks. So give me a second. Let me take a break. Let me play some ads here. I just want to make sure that my daughter's on her way home. I did not notice the time. So folks, don't go away. I'll be right back.
I'm Pastor Arthur from Calgary. You are listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio Worldwide podcast, only here on the Ordinary Joe Show.
For the best price in town on your flooring, call Complete Flooring. The unique shop-at-home experience means samples are brought right to your door, and because we don't pay salesmen, there's no markup on our products. Complete Flooring does the installation of new hardwood floors and sands them using a dustless machine, making the sanding process cleaner. We also specialize in refinishing, staining, and custom staining of existing hardwood floors. Our Green Guard certified environmentally friendly finish is now available. Drying in a quarter of the time of regular stains means you can get back in your house sooner, and it will last longer. If you're a homeowner, general contractor, or a building or property manager, Complete Flooring services are available to you. So give us a call today.
Consider supporting the OJTV production costs and be an insider member for only $3 a month. Go to patreon.com/OJTV Canada. Thank you for your continued support.
Canadians all across the country are sick and tired of the lies, the fear-mongering, and the hate speech they hear from the mainstream media. Download the free radio app, Freedom Fighter Radio. Click the link below, scan our QR code, join our mailing list, and get a free download of our Freedom Fighter Radio app only here on OJTV on The Ordinary Joe Show.
Consider supporting the OJTV production costs and be an insider member for only.
Welcome back, folks. It's Freedom Fighter Radio. Sorry about that. Welcome back, folks. Yep, my daughter just arrived home, so there's no worry. I do not have to cancel this live cast. We can continue on. And so before the break, I was talking about this policy proposal that Henry Kissinger gathered from his internal think tank at the National Security Department. And the proposal this one particular individual has a different proposal than the rest, and his proposal was, instead of trying to reverse the trade deficit, America needs to triple down on the trade deficit that they were experiencing. And when sought out what's the reason behind it, well, listen to the reason. This is the reason that was given, and this became the policy of the United States. All right. So the reason was, it, the first of all, before I continue, this information, I gathered this information from a a testimony that was given by a former Ministry of Finance of the country of Greece, who gathered this information in the process of writing a book. He was gathering artifacts and documents, and he was going through a certain vein of thought for his book, and he bumped into these documents, all of these half-page proposals of Henry Kissinger's think tank, all of these submitted proposals to Henry Kissinger. What are they going to do? How are they going to solve this problem of the very first instance of a trade deficit in 1968? He got a hold of all these proposals. His name is Yanis Varoufakis. He used to be the Minister of Finance. I believe he's a globalist. I do not agree with everything that this guy is proposing when he gives talks to many business leaders and business meetings. However, I do believe that he's saying the truth when he was sharing this anecdote, this particular incident of and this policy, right? So to continue on, the policy, it became American policy to triple down on the deficit since 1968. And the reason behind it, in this proposal, this guy who proposed it to Henry Kissinger, what he was saying is that if America create this triple down deficit, it will create a vortex of sort, a vacuum of sort, a black hole of sort, that as long as the Americans can keep the American dollar as the dominant currency of the world, you know, if you are, for example, if you are a Greek businessman, or if you are an Arab, if you are Chinese or Taiwanese back in those days in the 1960s, and even now, if you do business and your customer is America, and the American business counterpart is telling you, I need your product, I want to buy from you, I'm going to pay you American dollars, right? The only reason, the only way that business people from other countries will accept that proposal, this business proposal to purchase any goods or service using their own country's currency, in this case an American dollar, is if it can only happen if the business people of the foreign countries agree or perceive that the dollar value, or the currency that you're using to pay them, is something that they can rely on, they can count on, they can exchange for other goods, that there's credibility on that currency, and that currency is strong, right? So because the American dollar was so strong, and there was a social engineering push and economic push and all kinds of manipulation that's going on in the world trade to keep the American dollar the strongest currency in the world, then according to this policy, if they create, if they triple down the trade deficit of America, it will create this vortex of sort that will suck in all of Germany's production will come to America. All of the production in Japan of all their cars or of all their electronics, everything that they create in Japan, vast majority of those products will come to America. So in a way, this new economic policy was saying we need the wealth of the world to flood into America. Real value. So we're not they're not interested in, because in the typical Keynesian economics, you want the currency of the world to come, because in that kind of paradigm you're thinking the more currency I get from, from the UK, from Canada, or I mean, okay, from the perspective of the Canadians, and from a perspective of any nation state who engage in trading with other countries. The idea, the typical status quo Keynesian economic idea is that you want to sell products in exchange for other people's money, right? So you want to create, produce, or harvest natural resources and sell those resources outside of your country in exchange for other countries' currency flowing in. Other countries' currency flowing in a Keynesian economic paradigm is wealth, is building wealth. But this 1968 foreign policy by a Henry Kissinger think tank operative understood the future of the world, which is going to be based on technocracy. And this is everything is aligned, everything is in preparation all the way back in 1968. That's why I believe that some of these people are they they're not okay. It's borderline. I'm not gonna go there right now. I'm not gonna go there right now because I know that some of my listeners are not ready for that kind of talk about the supernatural. So we'll leave that out. Uh, but there seems to be people in the past who seems to be privy about the future. I talk about this about Zbigniew Brzezinski, for example. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is the co-founder of the with John Rockefeller. John Rockefeller. Zbigniew Brzezinski founded the Trilateral Commission with John Rockefeller, and Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote this book. Um, I can't remember the title, but it talks about the future. And in this book that he wrote, it describes everything that we are experiencing today in 2025. How, social media, internet, electronic access to the internet, electronic devices that help us stay connected to the internet, to the metaverse, and ultimately to the omniverse. And if you're new to this podcast, you're not familiar with omniverse and metaverse, just refer to some of our previous episodes. I have explained the difference between many of those. But in 1968, they seem to have foretold or foreseen the idea of a social Chinese style social credit system, which is another name for the fourth industrial revolution, which is another name for the great reset, which is another name for technocracy. All of those different terminologies can all be summed up with one word: Patrick Wood, and Dr. Anthony Sutton. These are the people who open our eyes, and many people in the freedom community still hasn't touched any of their books. Patrick Wood and Anthony Sutton, they have exposed the futuristic plan of the New World Order, which is technocracy. The New World Order Chinese style social credit system, digital ID, digital currency, carbon wallets, energy wallets, UBI, universal basic income, the metaverse, the omniverse, the fourth industrial revolution. All of these can be summed up in one word, in one definition, which is technocracy. And what is the definition of technocracy? Technocracy is the science of social engineering. That is the textbook definition of what technocracy is. But what is the description? How do you describe technocracy? Technocracy is a world government. It cannot be contained in just one nation state, but it's a world government that is run by a new international economic order, NIEO. What does that sound like, folks? NIEO, New International Economic Order. That is the economic order of the NWO, New World Order. The New World Order. The New World Order is a global government. Nobody left behind. No one left behind. That principle, that Bush principle of no one left behind, is actually amalgamating the idea of inclusiveness in the woke progressive mindset. Inclusiveness is a virtue signal that makes people think, oh, I'm included, I'm not left out. No. Inclusiveness in a technocratic point of view means you are assimilated. Resistance is futile. Doesn't matter if you're from Asia, doesn't matter if you're from the Philippines or from Africa, from the Middle East, you're Arab, you're Muslim, you're Christian, you're Jew. When you are assimilated to the New World Order, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the Great Reset, the technocratic future of the world, you will be assimilated and resistance is futile. That is the principle in technocracy. Anyways, so going back to 1968, Henry Kissinger adopted this policy that we are going to triple down the American hegemony, will triple down on the trade deficit because it will suck in real value of the world into the United States. Because at that point, it's not the real United States that we know of, the land of the free, the home of the brave. It is the deep state who's running the United States, as we know, as many of us freedomizers know. There is a dark element in the United States government, which is the deep state. That's the shadow government that really run things. So the shadow government has made it this design to triple down on the trade deficit that will create this black hole that sucks in the wealth of the world into the deep state, which is the early version of the New World Order, right? So the oil and the minerals and the rare earth minerals and the fisheries and the farm products and the lumber and the raw materials of the world are flowing into the United States because those are real value. Those value are expressed by energy. And in the new international economic order, the new currency will not be American dollar, will not be Bitcoin, will not be silver, will not be gold, will not be banknotes. It will be energy units. That is the futuristic vision of the technocrats, of the New World Order, of the Great Reset. You will own nothing and you'll be happy about it because everything will be run by energy credits. So your value, my value, your access to things will all be determined by our social credit, and our social credit will be compensated by energy credits. That's how the world will unify under one Currency. As we know, there's a currency war going on right now. The BRICS nations wants to create their own currency to undermine the American dollar, right? And um, Donald Trump wants to push the status quo of keeping the American dollar as the dominant currency of the world. But the technocrats have came on board the Trump train and actively trying to hijack the Trump train. The arch technocrats such as Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Jeff Bezos, Vivek Ramaswamy. Used to be a big fan of Vivek, but I can see now how technocratic he is. And 80 other billionaires, tech billionaires, that has came aboard the Trump train. This is their ambition, is to use the Trump presidency because they know they couldn't defeat Trump. If you can beat them, join them. This has been, I think, this is the observation of many awake freedomizers. What's her name? Um, we really have to listen to all the insights and the deep research that I forgot her name. Unlimited Hangouts. What's her name again? Um, this very very important freedomizer of our generation. She has discussed all of this. Listen to Patrick Wood. Listen to you guys know Rosa Query. She was a liberal progressive who kind of turned turned around and wrote a book, a whistleblowing book titled "Behind the Green Mask." You guys do a Google of "Behind the Green Mask." She exposed this green the cult behind the green movement, the technocracy behind the green sustainable SDG, Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, the Agenda 21, the Agenda 2030 goals of the United Nations. She whistleblow on that in her book, Hiding Behind the Green Mask. She passed away mysteriously about 2 years ago. But in her book, she discussed how the New World Order, the Agenda 2030 proponents, what they want to accomplish with the Agenda 2030 is to make an inventory of all energy credits, meaning real value, meaning wealth of the world, all the fish in the ocean, all the birds in the air, all the rivers. They want an inventory. How many rivers are there on earth? How many lakes? How many trees in the forest? How many mammals? How many elephants? How many fish in the ocean? How could you make an inventory of all things? They want to make an inventory of all things because they want to control. It's a totalitarian control of the entire planet. Check it out. She explicitly explained this in her book, Hiding Behind the Green Mask by Rosa Query. Koire. My daughter just got home. Let me just do a quick check on her. Don't go away, folks. You're listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio. I'll be back in just a minute. Let's take a short break.
For the best price in town on your flooring, call Complete Flooring. The unique shop-at-home experience means samples are brought right to your door, and because we don't pay salesmen, there's no markup on our products. Complete Flooring does the installation of new hardwood floors and sands them using a dustless machine, making the sanding process cleaner. We also specialize in refinishing, staining, and custom staining of existing hardwood floors. Our Green Guard certified environmentally friendly finish is now available. Drying in a quarter of the time of regular stains means you can get back in your house sooner, and it will last longer. If you're a homeowner, general contractor, or a building or property manager, Complete Flooring services are available to you. So give us a call today.
I'm Pastor Arthur from Calgary. You are listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio Worldwide podcast, only here on the Ordinary Joe Show.
Consider supporting the OJTV production costs and be an insider member for only $3 a month. Go to patreon.com/OJTV Canada. Thank you for your continued support.
Canadians all across the country are sick and tired of the lies, the fear-mongering, and the hate speech they hear from the mainstream media. Download the free radio app, Freedom Fighter Radio. Click the link below, scan our QR code, join our mailing list, and get a free download of our Freedom Fighter Radio app only here on OJTV on The Ordinary Joe Show.
Consider supporting the OJTV production costs and be an insider member for only $3 a month. Go to patreon.com/OJTV Canada. Thank you for your continued support.
Welcome back, folks. It's Freedom Fighter Radio.
Are you able to hear me back there, folks? I can't hear my audio. Hello. Welcome back to the Freedom Fighter Radio. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. We are talking about trade deficits and the tariff threat to Canadian goods and services coming to the United States that probably will be imposed upon the trade relation between America and Canada on Monday when Donald Trump, president-elect, becomes president. 47th president of the United States, Donald Trump, will be inaugurated on Monday. So let's talk about that. What does that mean for Canadian economy? So the elites, the power that be, they are pushing back, and they want us to think that we are patriotic when we go along their psyop. This anti-protectionist stance in both sides of the aisle in Ottawa, both the Liberals and the Conservatives, are really towing the line of the New World Order. We know that in the area of the Green New Deal, in the area of the Sustainable Development Goals, we know that the Conservatives under Stephen Harper has signed up Canada to the SDG, and we know that Pierre Poilievre is towing the line of the New World Order, of the globalist agenda. And the New World Order wants to create a one world government. And so I'm getting a little ahead of myself. There's so much to talk about, but let me slow my the RPM in my brain is just, there's so many things I want to talk about. But so let's slow down a little bit and talk about these tariff threats. So I talk a little bit about, I think every nation state, every Western society, I think we should start taking a look at tariffs. Let's take a look at tariffs, because I was debating yesterday if I'm going to go down this train of thought in our podcast for this next episode, or weigh in on Mark Carney's bid for the leadership of the Federal Liberal Party, because he went to American late night comedy Jon Stewart and sort of announced his bid for the leadership of the Liberal Party without making an explicit announcement. But the day after, he made the announcement in Edmonton, Alberta. And apparently, Mark Carney, the former Governor General of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, is now vying for the leadership of the Liberal Party. And how is it connected to what we're talking about? What we're talking about is he started bad mouthing Pierre Polyev on American national TV by saying that Pierre Polyev, unlike him, Pierre Polyev doesn't have an actual experience in the real world in the financial industry. That's true. That's true. And I'm not citing. Well, um I'm not singing the same tune as Mark Carney. Carney wants to take the credit for Canada's, and the liberal woke of America gives Carney the credit. I think he was the Bank of Canada Governor General during the Harper time, but it was during Harper's government that we went through the 2008 subprime crisis. Bear with me, folks. This is has a lot of things to do because when I was debating if I am going down that route of exposing Mark Carney and talking about the tariff, I think the tariff is a little bit more urgent discussion that we need to have because a lot of people are alarmed and anxious. Some people are going depressed with this tariff. And Mark Carney is sort of taking the credit for Canada's resilience in 2008's financial crisis that allowed Canada to be bulletproof. It's virtually only Canada among many Western nations, if not all of the Western societies. Only Canada was bulletproof in the 2008 subprime crisis. We didn't get hit hard. Everybody got hit, but only Canada came out successful against the 2008 financial crisis. Mark Carney is taking credit as he believes that it was, or everybody believes that it was the Bank of Canada's policies and Canadian banking industry policies and culture that allowed us to have a resilience against the 2008 financial crisis, when indeed it has nothing to do with Canadian banking industry. It wasn't the Canadian banking industry. Actually, if the Canadian banking industry got their way and it became the dominant force in 2008, we will not be different from every other country who had to bail out their banks, who had to um, go the same route and have deep recessions during the 2008 financial crisis. And I found out about this many years later, but actually, I found out about this factoid last year when I was researching regarding the digital currency, how in the United States, the push for digital ID and digital currency was killed by, you know who? The Association of Credit Unions of America. And apparently, in 2008, about 35% of Canadians all over Canada in 2008, upwards of 35% of Canadians prefer to do their banking with credit unions rather than the big five banks. So that's a big chunk of the Canadian population. Yes, the vast majority of Canadians are still banking with the big five banks, but there was a big segment of society who prefer to use credit unions. And why is this important to our conversation today? Credit unions are like, you guys remember the Toronto dollar? Toronto dollar? That was an experiment. I think that, if a Freedomizer mayor come on board in the future to be our mayor in Toronto, I think that person, whoever that Freedomizer mayor um, wins an election, should bring back the idea of a Toronto dollar. I don't know if you guys remember me talking about this, but secessionism is a boo boo word among nationalists because we think that if all of our provinces are united, that is a patriotic it's a patriotic virtue signal to speak against an independent Quebec, for example. It is patriotic. It is a Canadian patriotic duty to speak against Wexit, for example. Like if Alberta wants to be their own country, that's anti-Canadian. If you, this is cultural social engineering. Just bear with me as we're just having a discussion. We're just having a conversation. That's the point of this podcast. Why is it so evil and vilified? Why is it so evil and vilified to talk about from a national point of view, from a federal point of view? There are many layers to this social engineering mindset. From the national point of view, it is evil, it is demonized to even entertain the idea of a Republic of Canada. The mainstream media, the political class, the elites, the haves, the upper middle class Canadians would not want you to entertain the idea of a Republic of Canada, like emancipating ourselves from the powers, the diktats of the monarchy. A lot of people say dismissing it, monarchy, the King of England, King Charles. It is all symbolic, really. Is it symbolic, eh? There, there's no such thing as the British Empire anymore. That's true on paper, but in practice, the Five Eyes Alliance and 10 other countries have a. In practice, there is still this affinity to the crown and to monarchy, as if these countries are still subject to the British Empire. But in modern day, it was packaged to, we were made to believe that there's no more British Empire. It's just the Commonwealth of Nations, it's a Commonwealth of former British colonies, and we're just cooperating with each other. If that's the case, why don't we have a constitution in Canada? Are we truly an independent nation state, or are we still a colony? Because if we are a true independent nation state, we should have, what we have is a Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom. Is that a constitution? Is the best thing next to the constitution. Well, we have the Magna Carta, right? But why don't we have a Canadian constitution? So we can employ constitutional right. Because the Charter of Rights and Freedom that was devised by the old Trudeau, there's so many, and many of you knows that it is almost designed for failure if you implore the Canadian rights of the Charter of Rights and Freedom in the courts when you are fighting against the mandates, those who got tickets, COVID mandate tickets for not wearing a mask, for assembling, for not having a vaccine running in their blood. This group, we used to have a collaboration with Stand for Thee. They have won a lot of cases in the courts by imploring. I think I can't remember what. It's not the Charter of Rights that they use in the courts. It's the other one. But anyways, the idea of a Republic of Canada is demonized and vilified. But where is that coming from? The strong voice against entertaining that idea is coming from the mainstream media, which all of a sudden members of the Freedomizers are embracing the mainstream media narrative when it comes to an independent Alberta. Now, the mainstream media, CBC, don't like that idea. All of a sudden, members of the freedom community embraces the CBC because this fallacy of thinking that it is a patriotic duty to speak against independent provinces. Very much like speaking against um, vaccinations or presenting your vaccination passports you know, is a violation of social responsibility. This is a woke mind virus, a psyop, a mental illness that people who refuse to adopt a critical thinking mind is always going along with this lemming type of mentality. It is anti-science. It is your responsibility to lock down and isolate and put mask and social distance. And if you speak against those, then you are anti-science. You're anti-social responsibility. People love to pay taxes because paying taxes is a patriotic duty. Overpaying taxes is even more patriotic, right? So that's why there are many financial institutions, such as my former employer, the IG Wealth Management, formerly called Investors Group. One of the big business of Investors Group is tax planning, a legal way of reducing your tax exposure. Because if you don't do anything about your tax plan, the default is the government will overtax you. And that is the unfortunate thing in our Canadian society. Only the wealthy can afford a tax planner. And the vast majority of our ordinary Jane and Joe Canadian society are overpaying in taxes. Overpaying in taxes is the default in Canada, because if you don't have a tax plan, if you don't have a understanding of tax exposure, unnecessary tax exposure, the CRA will not on its own volition will tell you, hey, sorry, you're overpaying taxes. Here are some money. I want to give you back some money. Do you think the CRA will do that? No. If you are making a mistake in your tax filing and you're overpaying taxes, they'll be silent. But if you are underpaying taxes, oh, you will hear from the tax man. You will hear from the tax man. But many affluent Canadians who can afford to have their own corporations and corporate tax planner and corporate accountants and corporate advisors, they pay less taxes than the blue collar Canadians. And the CRA will not tell you that, you know, file your tax again because you overpaid. No, they will not tell you that. They will be silent if you're overpaying taxes. So the default, when I used to work on Bay Street, the default for most Canadians, and I believe this is also for most Americans, if you do not know how to lessen your exposure to overtaxing, the default is overpayment of taxes. That's why there are legal advisors and there are legal businesses that actually their business is all about legally reducing your tax exposure. because your wealth, building wealth in Western societies, there are two. They say there are two definites in your financial health or unhealth or financial sickness. There are two constants. Those two constants are death and taxes. And when you die, you are taxed just for dying, right? That is the matter of fact in Canada. That's the status quo of taxes in Canada. And number one detriment for Canadians building wealth is not because they're underpaid. It's because they're overpaying taxes. That is, according to many financial advisors, legal financial advisors, even your own, doesn't matter where your financial advisor is employed at. Go ask your financial advisor what is keeping me from building wealth or getting ahead. Is it because I do not have enough income, or I spend too much? After credit card, even before credit card expenses and interest payment on loans is only second to the biggest expenditure of most Canadian families. The biggest expenditure is not your mortgage. It's not your food expense. It's not tuition expense for your children. The biggest expense for most Canadian families is taxes. Taxes, federal, municipal, extra taxes here, extra taxes there, this kind of tax, that kind of tax, GST, PST, excise tax, property tax, all kinds of taxes. The biggest expense for every Canadian family are overpaying in taxes. So there are legitimate businesses who actually advises people to reduce their tax exposure. So a lot of people, they say it is your patriotic duty to pay taxes. And those who have been brainwashed by the woke progressive mentality, you would even hear some Canadians would say, I love overpaying on taxes because it's my patriotic duty. If I overpay in taxes, it's my patriotic duty. What about your duty for your own children? You are going to love.
I'm Pastor Arthur from Calgary. You are listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio Worldwide podcast, only here on the Ordinary Joe Show.
Consider supporting the OJTV production cost and be an insider member for only $3 a month. Go to patreon.com/OJTV Canada. Thank you for your continued support.
Canadians all across the country are sick and tired of the lies, the fear-mongering, and the hate speech they hear from the mainstream media. Download the free radio app, Freedom Fighter Radio. Click the link below, scan our QR code, join our mailing list, and get a free download of our Freedom Fighter Radio app only here on OJTV on The Ordinary Joe Show.
For the best price in town on your flooring, call Complete Flooring. The unique shop-at-home experience means samples are brought right to your door, and because we don't pay salesmen, there's no markup on our products. Complete Flooring does the installation of new hardwood floors and sands them using a dustless machine, making the sanding process cleaner. We also specialize in refinishing, staining, and custom staining of existing hardwood floors. Our Green Guard certified environmentally friendly finish is now available. Drying in a quarter of the time of regular stains means you can get back in your house sooner, and it will last longer. If you're a homeowner, general contractor, or a building or property manager, Complete Flooring services are available to you. So give us a call today.
Welcome back. It's Freedom Fighter Radio on a Thursday night. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. Sorry for getting abruptly taken to a break because my batteries died. Mic batteries are very energy suckers. They consume a lot of battery power. So this will be our last segment, folks. There's so much that we need to talk about, but just to kind of summarize, because I feel like I haven't even touched the surface or scratched the surface of what we really need to talk about, which is, I believe, in my opinion, that this tariff could actually be a benefit to the ordinary Jane and Joe Canadians. And I would like to explain why. Bear with me, I will, for this last segment, but just to kind of tie a ribbon on the mindset, the red pilling of the mindset that we were talking about before the break, is that being brainwashed is a difficult leash to get out of, because when you're brainwashed, you do not know that you are brainwashed. Because if you know that you're brainwashed, then you will not be brainwashed anymore. But if you're brainwashed, you are going to resist anything that the brainwashing decree that has taken over your brain. If a person is brainwashed, it will reject anything that will antidote that brainwash, because it's part of the programming. If I am brainwashed, and I'm not saying I'm fully awake, I probably have some. You and we need to be really humble to evaluate and have an internalization to ask that question: am I brainwashed? Am I fully awake? Am I fully red pilled, or am I still brainwashed in some aspect? I think it is in our best interest to consider and be open minded to the possibility that we are brainwashed, and find a way to unbrainwash our brains, to unwash our brains. I don't know if I'm expressing that in proper English. But if a person is brainwashed, it's almost difficult unless this person gets out of that paradigm thinking. That's the only way we can get red pilled. So when people are thinking, it's my patriotic duty to overpay in taxes, is that really patriotism, or is that just being lazy to understand? It is my patriotic duty that when I am pulled over by police, that I give up everything. Is it really patriotic to follow everything that the government tells you? If the government tells you to inject a DNA altering, poisonous, potentially deadly vaccine serum into your bloodstream, well, I will obey the government because it's my patriotic duty to be obedient. So the same kind of vein, the same kind of dynamics, the same kind of mechanics is what the mainstream media and the elite class, if I can reiterate this, but I won't go down this rabbit hole too deep, but let me just reiterate this phrase, which I made a statement in 2 episodes ago. I was talking about there is not a racial tension problem in Canada. When I first arrived in Canada, racism is very low in Canada until 2015, when Justin Trudeau became the prime minister, all of a sudden there was oversensitivity in racial tensions. I believe that's engineered and fabricated. But fundamentally, when I arrived in Canada in 1993, 10, 15, 20, my first 20 years as a Canadian, I never been a victim of racial discrimination. Well, not blatantly. There's always going to be subliminal or minor insinuation of a racial discrimination. You can never 1,000%, 100% eradicate that from any Western society, especially if you live in a society that's mixed culture, multicultural society that the New World Order have created us all to live in a multicultural society. But that is a weaponized psyop. But we're not going to talk about that right now. Just we don't have in the interest of time. But just let me reiterate that there is not a racial tension problem in Canada. In my observation, I'm almost a Canadian for 30 years. I've been living in Canada for almost 30 years. I came in Canada in 93. I went back home for a couple of years. I came back again in 95. But if we count from 93, my first decade was in 2003. My second decade is 2013. My, oh, oh, wow. I'm almost 40 years in Canada. Okay, let me count again. 2003, 10 years. 2013, 20 years. 2023, 30 years. 32 years. I've been in Canada. I've been a Canadian resident for 32 years. And I'm only 50. So I live in Canada longer than I live in my birth country, the Philippines. So I'm more Canadian than Filipino in many ways. But the idea of being patriotic by following everything that the government tells you to do, or the mainstream media is touting a certain kind of narrative, and they make you feel like it is your patriotic duty to toe that line. Am I muted, folks? Let me just check if I'm coming across. Hello? Hello? Okay. Give me a thumbs up if I am. Oh, I should have asked my daughter to let me listen to. Let me just unmute. Okay. All right. So I'm still live out there. Um, so in that kind of dynamics and mechanics, I think it is the same kind of paradigm or mechanism that we are going through when the political class, the media class, the elite class, the upper middle class, they're telling you to not even entertain the idea of 51st state, the idea of the Republic of Canada emancipating our country from the overlording of the monarchy. It's unpatriotic, they say, to think of an independent Quebec, an independent Alberta. Here's my point. In a new world order vision, that the in a one world government vision that the new world order has, a technocratic one world government that the social engineers, the technocrats wants to ambition for the world. The solution to centralization, in my opinion, is decentralization. The antidote to one world government is decentralization. And when I talk about decentralization, I think amalgamating is a push for one world government. De amalgamating or departing from a big union, a big united country or affiliation, affinity to a Commonwealth or an EU or and we'll get to that. We'll get to that part where the question is, so if if Donald Trump wants to unite Canada and America, isn't that a move, another move to globalization as well? True, it is. It is. But I want to touch on that maybe in the next episode because that's true. That's a big question and reservation that we need to have as freedomizers is this trolling of Donald Trump another move to globalization? It's true. So, but the reason I'm talking about centralization versus decentralization is when Mark Carney is taking the credit for the Canadian resilience against the 2008 financial crisis is because he would make you believe that it was the Canadian banking industry or the Canadian banking policy that saved us from the American initiated 2008 subprime mortgage crisis. That is not totally true. The the analysis of many alternative thinkers about international trade is Canada's resilience against the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis is because there's a big chunk of Canadians who preferred to bank with credit unions versus banking with the big five banks. The reason for that, the reason why that was the antidote is y- credit unions has the effect of decentralizing the monetary system from the big five banks. Remember when you were debank because you donated to the truckers convoy? You don't get debank if you were in a credit union. It's mostly the freedomizers who were banking with the big five. I think it's called the big six banks now, right? The big five or the big six banks. The clients, the customers of the big six banks were the ones that were debanked by Führer Freeland. It was not really those who were banking with credit unions. So the same in the same vein in 2008, those who were banking with the credit unions actually saved Canada from the subprime mortgage. Okay, folks, we're not done with this topic. So tomorrow, I'm running out of time now because I kind of went a big roundabout. The tariffs, when it comes on Monday, just to give you a synopsis on the deep dive on this, it is possible that the effect of the tariffs to the Canadian economy is that when the tariff is imposed, especially to Canadian oil and gas, then it will be more expensive for the Americans to buy Canadian imported oil, which in effect will make the Americans look for cheaper oil, and that will be the pretext for the American entrepreneurs to start drill baby drill in America, which will now finally make the Americans tap into their own oil reserves. In the beginning of this episode, folks, rewind if you're just tuning in or if you're just watching this on post. In the beginning of this episode, I explained one of the reasons, according to Jerome Corsi's book, and also according to the historical account of Henry Kissinger in 1968, had imposed a um, a foreign policy of tripling down on American deficit so that it can bring in all the resources of the world into the United States because the American dollar is the most The American dollar is the most dominant currency in the world. Therefore, the world will be willing to sell to America, export their goods and services to America in exchange for American dollars. Americans are buying the world's wealth and resources with American dollars. In effect, America, and the side effect is for American people to also benefit from that. But it was the New World Order, the deep state, who has designed this vortex to create a launching pad for the New World Order, or the technocracy, of converting currency into energy credits, because the real value can be measured by energy. Food, lumber, all of these can be produced only with the use of energy. So every item on earth, every product, every service will be measured by energy according to the new international economic order of the technocratic New World Order, or the Great Reset. So, um, if the tariff is imminent and the Americans will reject Canadian oil because it's going to be expensive, right? It's either the Canadian oil producers, the refiners, will be forced to bring down the price so that it'll still be competitive price wise in the US. When our oil arrives in the US, it will still be competitive price wise. Then the Americans will continue to buy Canadian oil. But if the oil producers do not want to comply to that pressure of bringing down the oil price, or giving more discounts to the Americans, then the Americans won't buy Canadian oil because it was going to be too expensive. They will look for domestically refined or produced oil, which will now give the American Congress the incentive to approve many more drillings, so that the Americans can buy locally produced oil. And if there's no demand for Canadian oil in America, then what's going to happen to Canadian oil? Then the Canadian producers, oil producers, won't have any excuse not to flood domestically our Canadian open market with Canadian oil. Why are we paying more? Well, the Canadian consumers. Why are the Canadian consumers paying more than the American consumers when we are the exporter and they were the importers? In today's status quo of the trade relationship between Canada and America, if Americans reject Canadian oil because it will be too expensive because of the tariffs, then there's no excuse for the Canadian government to allow the flooding of Canadian oil rich Canada, to flood our open market in Canada, local market of cheap oil. If oil becomes cheap for Canadians, then every product, every service, every cost to live in Canada will go down. The housing market, food, food prices will go down. Rents will go down. Everything will be more affordable if the government will allow Canadian oil to flood our local markets. Let's see. Let's see. Because they do not have an excuse. They do not have an excuse to export more than what we need. The, the conservative policy and the common sense policy is to allow domestic consumption of oil to be of a surplus, which will in effect drive down the price of oil first before we start exporting oil. And this is what, if I have another opportunity to talk to Pierre Poliev, because this was our point of contention the first time I had this conversation with Pierre, and I want to talk about Canadian oil. And he kept on insisting that oil is an internationally priced commodity. And I would say to that is, yes, for the international market, but it does not have OPEC should not be dictating the price of our local consumption in Canada. We should not be paying more than $1 for oil. We are an oil rich country and we're paying too much for gas. And that is impoverishing Canadian families because our political class have let us down. Our political class have betrayed the ordinary Jane and Joe Canadians and favor the oligarchs, the OPECs of the world. Folks, there's more to say about this, and we're running out of time, but this is my theory and my opinion and my different take on this tariff. I think we have to embrace the tariffs because it will allow our local markets to be flooded with rich Canadian oil, which will bring down the price of oil. And if the oil price in Canada goes down, everything goes down in price. It is the overnight solution to Canadian inflation, in my opinion. Let's pray that this tariff becomes a reality. If we can keep the oil instead of exporting our 4 million barrels of oil to the United States, let's keep that oil in Canada and bring down the price of oil in Canada, which will bring down everything else. The housing market, food prices, tuition fees, everything will go down in cost if our oil is abundant in Canada. I love you all. You've been listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio. There's more to talk about this, and we'll see you tomorrow. I'm your host, Ordinary Joe. You've been listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio. I love you, and God bless you. See you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Best price in town on your flooring? Call Complete Flooring. The unique shop-at-home experience means samples are brought right to your door, and because we don't pay salesmen, there's no markup on our products. Complete Flooring does the installation of new hardwood floors and sands them using a dustless machine, making the sanding process cleaner. We also specialize in refinishing, staining, and custom staining of existing hardwood floors. Our Green Guard certified environmentally friendly finish is now available. Drying in a quarter of the time of regular stains means you can get back in your house sooner, and it will last longer. If you're a homeowner, general contractor, or a building or property manager, Complete Flooring services are available to you. So give us a call today.
I'm Pastor Arthur from Calgary. You are listening to the Freedom Fighter Radio Worldwide podcast, only here on the Ordinary Joe Show.
Immediately out! Immediately go and don't come back.
Consider supporting the OJTV production costs and be an insider member for only $3 a month. Go to patreon.com/OJTV Canada. Thank you for your continued support.
Canadians all across the country are sick and tired of the lies, the fear-mongering, and the hate speech they hear from the mainstream media. Download the free radio app, Freedom Fighter Radio. Click the link below, scan our QR code, join our mailing list, and get a free download of our Freedom Fighter Radio app only here on OJTV on The Ordinary Joe Show.